Elliot Marsh laughed so hard the whole fairground turned to watch him do it. He pointed past the fence at a dozen ordinary, mud-caked goats, chewing hay like they hadn't heard him. "You'd get a better return burning this land than milking these things," he said, and the crowd around him laughed too. Daniel Voss didn't answer. He knelt down in the dirt, ran 2 fingers along a goat's flank, and checked the color of the milk pooling in his palm without a word. 200 people watched an investor humiliate a man over animals they assumed were worth nothing at all. None of them knew a black sedan was already idling outside a dairy lab 3 states away, waiting on 1 vial of that same milk. By the time the numbers came back, Elliot Marsh would spend a long time wishing he'd never opened his mouth. The farm sat at the end of a gravel road that most county maps didn't bother naming. 12 acres of sloped pasture, with a fence line that needed 2 new posts every spring, a hay barn with a loft that smelled of cedar and old rain, and a farmhouse where the porch light had been on the same timer for 4 years, because Daniel Voss had set it once and never felt the need to change it. He had bought the place for $22,000 at a county auction 18 months after his wife died. Nobody else bid. The auctioneer had paused twice, visibly uncertain whether the silence meant disinterest or whether something was wrong with the microphone. Inside the farmhouse, Maddie slept under a quilt her mother had sewn from fabric samples, small squares of blue and yellow, and a dusty green that looked almost silver in the morning light. She was 8 years old and had a stuffed goat named Pepper, whose left ear had been re-stitched 3 times. Every morning before school, she pulled on her boots before her coat, walked out to the pasture in whatever the weather was doing, and counted the herd out loud. She counted slowly, pointing at each one, and if the number came out wrong the first time, she started over from the beginning. She would not leave for school until the count was right twice. Daniel had never asked her to do this. She had simply begun one morning and never stopped, and he had come to think of it as the most reliable thing in his life. He had not told Maddie what his work used to be. She knew he understood animals. She knew he was careful with things. That was enough. What he had actually been was the lead formulation scientist at Vordan Nutritional Science in Basel, a position he'd held for 11 years before he understood that he was going to leave it. He had built proprietary dairy nutrition profiles for 3 of the largest wellness brands in Europe. He knew how to read a herd not by looking at the animals, but by what the animals produced: the color, the consistency, the specific golden hue of the butterfat layer when the milk cooled in an unheated vessel. He could identify a forage composition shift in a herd by the way the milk moved in a pan. His colleagues had called it intuition. It was not intuition. It was the accumulated result of 11 years of doing something carefully until it no longer required effort. He had left Vordan the summer after Elena died. Not because grief made him incapable of the work. He had actually considered staying, had sat at his desk in Basel for 3 weeks after the funeral, calculating whether precision could be a form of survival. But the precision had started to feel like a room with no doors. He needed land. He needed air that changed from 1 hour to the next. He needed his daughter to have grass beneath her boots and something to count every morning before the world asked anything of her. The goats came with the farm, 8 of them, mixed breed, underweight, left behind by the previous owner, along with a rusted gate latch and a feed calendar that ended in March. Daniel had spent the first winter adjusting their diet with a methodical care that would have looked extreme to anyone watching. Specific mineral ratios, forage rotations, a hydration schedule written in pencil on a card, tacked to the barn wall. He expanded the herd to 12 over the following spring. He was not farming, he was formulating. He simply did it outdoors now, in mud, with animals instead of centrifuges, and he found that the difference was not as significant as people might have assumed. Inside the barn, in a green metal feed bin his daughter used as a step stool to reach the upper shelf, was a leather-bound ledger his wife Elena had kept during the first season she spent with him on a farm they'd rented briefly before Maddie was born. Elena had loved record-keeping in a way that had nothing to do with efficiency. She loved the act of writing things down, as though the writing made them permanent. The ledger recorded forage notes, behavioral observations, seasonal weight changes. Her handwriting was small and unhurried, and she had drawn a border of thin, looping lines around the cover page, with a pen that had slightly run out of ink halfway through. He kept it in the bin because the bin was the one place on the farm that stayed dry and remained at a consistent temperature. That was the reason, he told himself. He had not entered it in the inventory of things Elena left behind. The county agricultural fair happened every August in the valley town 12 miles south. Daniel did not usually go. He went that year because Maddie wanted to enter Pepper in the stuffed animal category in the children's pavilion, a category he had not known existed until she showed him the entry form with the relevant line already circled in red crayon. He loaded 2 actual goats in the trailer, not for competition, but because the fair's demonstration paddock needed animals, and the organizer had called him twice. He brought the goats. He brought Maddie. He brought Pepper in a canvas bag over Maddie's shoulder. Elliot Marsh arrived at the fair with 3 other men in the kind of clothing that suggested they had not come from work, but had nevertheless come to conduct it. He was the managing partner of Ashford Capital, which held agricultural land interests across 4 counties, and had, over the previous 2 years, quietly acquired 3 farms adjacent to Daniel's property. People at the fair knew who he was. People at the fair moved slightly when he moved, the way the space around a person shifts when they hold weight that others recognize. He stopped at the demonstration paddock and looked at Daniel's goats with the particular expression of a man encountering something he has already decided is irrelevant. Maddie was sitting on the lower fence rail beside her father, Pepper tucked under one arm, carefully counting the crowd in the adjacent ring, with the same slow finger point she used on the herd every morning. She reached 11, frowned, and started over. She did not hear what Marsh said next. Daniel did. Elliot Marsh said it the way men like him say most things. Not loudly, but with the particular confidence of someone who has learned that volume is unnecessary when the people around you are already listening. He looked at Daniel's goats, looked at Daniel, and then looked back at the goats, as though the second look confirmed what the first had suspected. You'd get a better return burning this land than milking these things. The men with him laughed. 3 other people standing nearby laughed too, not because the line was especially funny, but because Marsh had delivered it with the relaxed certainty of someone who expects agreement. And agreement is easier than its alternative. A woman with a clipboard from the fair's organizing committee looked down at her papers. A teenage boy by the fence took out his phone. Daniel Voss knelt, his back to all of them, and pressed 2 fingers into the small mineral block he'd set at the corner of the paddock, checking the residue the way someone might check a wristwatch. Automatic, brief, informative. He did not look up. Marsh was not finished. "What does a man do with 12 goats?" he asked, still addressing his companions, the question aimed at Daniel but not requiring him. "I mean operationally, what's the revenue model?" He tilted his head at the herd, with the performative curiosity of someone who already knows the answer they intend to give. "Craft cheese? Soap? You're basically running a very expensive hobby. On land that, by the way," he gestured at the surrounding valley, "we valued at $800 per acre 2 years ago. That's what's being held down here." The small crowd had grown. County fairs have a particular acoustic quality. Sound carries further than it should across open ground, and people move toward wherever something is happening. 30 people now, then 40. A photographer from the County Gazette had shifted from the livestock ring to this paddock without quite deciding to. Marsh's voice carried with the easy projection of a man accustomed to rooms that belonged to him. Daniel stood. He was not a large man. He was the kind of man who exists precisely in the space he occupies. No more, no less. He turned to face Marsh for a moment with an expression that held nothing particularly readable in it, and then he turned back to the paddock and adjusted the water trough angle by 3 degrees, so the overflow ran downhill instead of pooling. Maddie climbed down from the rail and stood beside him, Pepper in both arms now. She looked at Marsh with the uncomplicated directness of a child who has not yet learned to manage her eye contact for social reasons. "That one's chewing wrong," she told her father quietly, pointing to the smallest goat. Daniel watched the animal for a moment. "She'll correct," he said. Marsh watched this exchange with the satisfied expression of someone whose point was being made for him. He turned to his companions. 800 an acre, he repeated. Minimum. Then he walked away, trailing his small group, and the crowd began to disperse, with the slightly restless energy of people who had witnessed something without being entirely sure what it was. The first dismissal had come 6 months before the fair. A buyer from a regional food cooperative had visited the farm in February, introduced by a mutual contact, who described Daniel only as a small producer with quality stock. The buyer had tasted the milk, paused, tasted it again, and then asked Daniel what premium he was seeking per liter. Daniel named a price that reflected what the milk actually was. The buyer set his cup down with the careful deliberateness of someone ensuring they didn't react visibly. Then he said that for raw goat's milk, even high-quality raw goat's milk, Daniel's pricing was 3 times the market ceiling, and that frankly no distributor in the region would touch it at that number. He thanked Daniel for his time, with the tone of a man closing a door he intended to leave closed. Daniel had walked him to his car, noted the specific protein film the milk had left on the rim of the tasting cup, a film that dried to a faint amber at the edge, a characteristic he had documented in only one other herd in his career, and gone back to his ledger. The second dismissal came from Raymond Holt, who ran the largest dairy operation in the county and had been quoted in the regional agricultural newsletter 3 times in the past year. Holt had seen Daniel at a farm supply auction in March and mentioned, to the man standing next to him, but not quietly, that he'd heard about the Voss place. He said that a man who'd spent his career in a laboratory had no business trying to run a working farm, and that the results would be what they always were when theorists met actual land. He said this without malice, which was almost worse. It was simply a statement of what he considered obvious, offered with the comfortable authority of a man who has never been surprised by anything and does not expect to start. The man standing next to Holt had nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're absorbing a truth they find familiar. At the fair, after Marsh left, Daniel loaded Maddie's ribbon into the truck. She had placed second in the stuffed animal category. Pepper had lost to a handmade felt rabbit with button eyes that Maddie privately thought was not as structurally sound, and he drove them home in the long, level light of an August evening. Maddie held Pepper out the window for 3 miles. The stuffed goat's restitched ear flagged in the wind. "That man was rude to the goats," Maddie said, not looking at him. "The goats weren't listening," Daniel said. She considered this. "I was listening." He drove. What none of the men who had dismissed him knew, what no one in that county knew, or had thought to ask, was that in the previous spring, a quality assurance technician at a dairy processing facility in another state had flagged an anomaly in a routine intake batch. The batch had originated from an anonymous contracted supplier, listed only as Voss Dairy Holdings, LLC, a name Daniel had created to process a quiet arrangement he'd made through a former Vordan colleague who now consulted for a mid-sized American wellness company called Luminary Life. The anomaly the technician flagged was not a contaminant or a compliance issue. The anomaly was that the milk's nutritional composition was statistically improbable. It matched, within a margin of error the technician had initially assumed was a calibration fault, the proprietary profile at the center of Luminary Life's best-selling product, a profile the company had spent 4 years and substantial capital attempting to source consistently, and had been quietly failing to replicate at scale. The technician had sent the report to her supervisor. The supervisor had sent it upward. The report was now, on the evening of the county fair, sitting on the desk of Luminary Life's head of ingredient sourcing. The black sedan was not yet idling outside a dairy lab 3 states away, but it would be, within the week. The woman who arrived at the farm on a Thursday morning, 12 days after the fair, did not introduce herself immediately. She stepped out of a black sedan, looked at the pasture for a long moment, and then looked at Daniel, with the particular attention of someone who has been told to look carefully and has taken the instructions seriously. She was in her mid-40s, wore a gray jacket over a plain shirt, and carried a soft-sided case that suggested laboratory equipment without announcing it. Her name was Claire Sutton, and she was the Director of Ingredient Integrity at Luminary Life. Daniel was replacing a fence post when she walked up the gravel path. He had the post set in the hole and was tamping the base with a wooden mallet, one even strike at a time, when he heard the car door. He finished the strike. Then he set the mallet down. "Mr. Voss," she said. "Yes." She looked at the herd in the pasture. "Your milk is causing us a problem," she said. "The good kind." He looked at her for a moment. Then he took off his gloves, folded them once, and tucked them into his back pocket. "Come in," he said. Maddie was at school. The kitchen table was clear, except for a bowl of apples and a half-finished drawing of a goat that Maddie had been working on for 3 days and had not yet decided was done. Daniel put the kettle on without asking. Claire Sutton set her case on the floor and opened it on the counter. 2 sealed glass vials, a portable spectrometer the size of a thick paperback book, a printed report in a manila folder, and a pair of nitrile gloves, still folded. She slid the report across the table. He did not pick it up immediately. "Luminary Life has a product," she said, "a nutritional supplement. The formulation is built around a very specific dairy protein matrix. The matrix took 4 years to develop. We've been sourcing the base ingredient from 3 different suppliers for 2 years, and none of them have matched the original trial composition consistently." She paused. "Your milk does, at 99.3% correlation, across 6 intake batches over 7 months. Daniel picked up the report. He read it the way he read everything, starting at the data table, not the summary. His eyes moved without hurry down the columns. The numbers were not a surprise to him. The numbers were confirmation of something he had already known. "Your intake technician flagged it as a calibration error," he said. "Initially, yes." He set the report down and stood. "I'll need to pull a morning draw," he said. "The afternoon composition shifts. If you're matching the trial matrix, you'll want the morning draw." Claire Sutton looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. "That's partly why I came in person." They went out to the barn. The morning light came through the east-facing slats at a low angle, laying thin gold bars across the concrete floor and the stainless steel of the milking stand. Daniel had modified himself. The angle of the rear support adjusted by 4 degrees from the manufacturer's standard, a change that reduced animal stress response during draw and produced a more consistent stick composition. He had calculated the angle, using a method he had first applied at Vordan, to a mechanized system worth 400 times what this stand had cost. He began with the first animal, a 7-year-old doe he'd named simply 7, the oldest in the herd, and the one whose production output had first confirmed to him, 3 winters ago, that what he had here was not ordinary. He secured her in the stand with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom the motion had become structural. Left hand to the near flank, a slight forward pressure to settle the weight, right hand adjusting the rear brace by feel. Claire Sutton watched from 2 feet behind him. She had not offered to help. She understood that helping would have been wrong. Daniel drew by hand. He did not use the pump. The first release he discarded into a separate bucket, a practice with no commercial rationale and a precise scientific one, which was that the initial expression carried a different surface protein concentration than the body of the draw. He had explained this to no one on the farm because there was no one on the farm to explain it to. He had simply always done it. The second release he collected in a chilled glass vessel he had retrieved from a shelf above the milking stand, a vessel that was, Claire Sutton noticed, marked with handwritten gradation lines in a permanent marker, spaced in increments that were not standard but were immediately recognizable to anyone who worked in nutritional formulation. "Those are Vordan increments," she said. He did not look up. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You worked at Vordan. 11 years. She stood very still. In her soft-sided case, back in the kitchen, was a document she had printed from a research database the previous evening. An 11-year-old white paper on proprietary dairy protein matrix formulation, authored by a D. Voss, and published under a Vordan institutional affiliation. She had printed it because the methodology matched the anomaly in the intake report in a way she had not been able to explain by coincidence. She had not mentioned the paper because she had not been certain the D. Voss on the farm was the D. Voss. Voss on the paper. She was now certain. Daniel moved to the second animal. Same sequence. Left hand, forward pressure, rear brace adjusted. This time by slightly less, because this animal carried her weight differently, and the angle that worked for 7 was 3 degrees too aggressive for her. He made the adjustment without pausing, or looking at the stand. Claire Sutton watched his hands make the correction, and she reached into her jacket pocket and turned off the voice recorder she had switched on when they entered the barn. Whatever she was going to put in her report, she did not need the audio. When he had finished the draw from 4 animals, the specific 4 whose individual outputs he had determined, through 18 months of solo record keeping, contributed the highest and most consistent matrix composition, he labeled the vessel in the same handwritten permanent marker, set it on ice, and carried it back to the kitchen table. He placed it in front of her. She looked at it. The fluid was a specific golden color, not the pale cream of standard goat milk, but a deeper, more saturated tone, the color of morning light itself caught in a glass, the color of something that had been arrived at deliberately. "That's the hue," she said. "Yes," he said. "It's been consistent for 22 months." She put on her nitrile gloves and transferred a sample to her spectrometer. While it ran, she sat back slightly and looked at the half-finished drawing of a goat on the table. Then she looked at the bowl of apples. Then she looked at Daniel Voss, sitting across from her in a kitchen that had a porch light on a timer and a drawing on the table, and no ceremony of any kind about it. "We have a contract structure we need to discuss," she said. "I know," he said. "The scale will require—" "I know what the scale will require," he said, not sharply, simply. The spectrometer finished its cycle. The result appeared on the small screen. Claire Sutton looked at the number for a moment, and then she turned the screen so that it faced Daniel. He looked at it without expression. 99.6%. Higher than the intake batches, higher than the trial matrix data. From the barn, faint and particular, came the sound of the herd moving in the morning, the soft percussion of hooves on packed earth, the low resonant sound of animals that had been well cared for, that had eaten what they were supposed to eat, that had been given the specific conditions required for producing something the world had not yet looked at carefully enough. Maddie came home from school at 3:15. She dropped her bag by the door, pulled off her boots without untying them, a habit Daniel had given up correcting, and walked to the kitchen. She stopped in the doorway when she saw the woman at the table. She looked at her father. "Did someone come about the goats?" she asked. "Yes," he said. Maddie considered this. Then she held up Pepper. "This is Pepper," she said to Claire Sutton. "She's a goat too, but a different kind." Claire Sutton looked at the stuffed animal with its re-stitched ear, and for the first time since she had arrived on the gravel path, something in her expression shifted from professional to human. "She looks well cared for," she said. "She is," Maddie said simply. The offer came on a Tuesday evening, 9 days after Claire Sutton's visit, in the form of a black sedan that was not hers. Daniel was in the barn when the headlights swept across the back wall. He had been checking the overnight forage levels and did not stop when he heard the car door. He finished recording the measurement in his ledger, a composition note written in the same small pencil script he had used since the first winter, and then he walked to the barn entrance and waited. Elliot Marsh came up the gravel path alone. He was not wearing the clothes he'd worn at the fair. He wore a dark jacket over a plain shirt, and he walked with slightly less of the fairground's easy performance in his step. Behind him, still at the car, a man in a gray suit stood with a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Marsh stopped a few feet from Daniel. He looked briefly at the barn, at the herd visible through the open gate, at the farmhouse where the porch light was on, and the kitchen window showed yellow and warm. He looked at all of this with the precise attention of a man recalculating something he thought he had already settled. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for the fair." Daniel waited. Marsh took this as permission to continue. "I've become aware of some interest in your operation," he said. "Significant interest. The kind of interest that changes what this land is worth, and what's sitting on it." He paused. He was a man who had made many offers, and he knew how to place a silence before a number. "I'd like to discuss a partnership arrangement. Ashford would provide the capital infrastructure for expansion, housing, processing, distribution, and we would structure a revenue share on the supply contract that I think you'd find generous." He named a figure. It was generous. It was also, Daniel understood immediately, approximately 1/3 of what the contract without Marsh's involvement would eventually be worth. Inside the farmhouse, Maddie was at the kitchen table. Through the window, Daniel could see the top of her head bent over something. The goat drawing, probably, or homework, or both at once, which was a thing she did, and which produced results of mixed quality in both categories. Marsh followed Daniel's gaze to the window. He let it sit there for a moment. Not a threat, nothing so legible as that, simply a placement, a reminder that the window was there, that what was behind it was there, that a man with a daughter and a gravel road and a porch light on a timer might have reasons to want the certainty that a number, even a reduced number, provided over the uncertainty of what came next. Daniel looked at the window. He looked at it with the same unhurried attention he gave to a composition reading or a fence post angle. Then he turned back to Marsh. "Maddie," he called, not loudly. The silhouette at the kitchen table looked up. A moment later, the back door opened, and she appeared in her socks. She had taken her boots off when she came inside, and had not put them back on, which meant she was now standing on cold porch boards, and would be annoyed about it in approximately 6 seconds. "Can you go check on 7 for me?" Daniel said. She was pulling left at the evening draw. Maddie looked at him. She looked at Marsh. She looked at the man by the car with the portfolio. Then she looked back at her father, with the expression of a child who has registered something she does not yet have language for. "Okay," she said. She went inside, put her boots on. He could hear the deliberate thump of each one, and came back out and crossed to the barn without looking at either man again. The barn light came on. Through the open gate, the warm sound of the herd adjusting to her arrival. Daniel turned back to Marsh. He did not speak for a moment. When he did, it was without volume or edge. "No," he said. Marsh held his position. He was a man who had learned that the first no was a position and not a decision. "The infrastructure alone." "I know what the infrastructure requires," Daniel said. "I don't need your infrastructure." Marsh looked at him steadily. He was recalculating again. Daniel could see it, the way the man's jaw moved slightly, the way he was searching for the angle that had not yet been tried. But there was no angle. The offer had been the angle. The apology had been the approach. The look at the kitchen window had been the final tool, and none of them had found purchase. "I'll leave the term sheet with you," Marsh said. "You can take it back," Daniel said. Marsh stood for another moment. Then he nodded, once, and turned and walked back to the car. The man with the portfolio looked at Daniel, looked at Marsh, and got into the passenger seat without opening the portfolio. The sedan reversed down the gravel road, the headlights sweeping back across the barn wall in the same arc they had made on the way in, and then the road was dark again. Daniel stood in the barn entrance for a while, after the sound of the car faded. The night air came in off the pasture, carrying the particular cool smell of dew beginning on grass, and from inside the barn came the low, specific sound of Maddie talking to Seven in the patient and slightly serious way she talked to all of them. Not baby talk, but honest conversation, the kind she conducted with animals, and occasionally with her father, and almost never with anyone else. He went inside the barn. She was crouched beside Seven, with one hand on the animal's flank, checking exactly what he had asked her to check, her small fingers pressed in the right place, learning the thing without knowing she was being taught. He did not disturb her. He picked up his ledger, made one more notation, and set it back on the shelf beside Elena's leather-bound breeding record, sitting quiet and dry in the green metal bin. He turned off the upper light and left her the lamp. The announcement happened on a Wednesday morning in October, in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in the city. And it was not the kind of event that had been planned as an announcement. It had been planned as a contract signing, a private, administrative affair attended by legal representatives, a notary, and 2 members of Luminary Life's executive team. But somewhere between the circulation of the final term sheet and the morning of the signing, the company's communications director had decided that what was about to happen was not administrative at all, and had invited 3 journalists and a photographer from a trade publication that covered the nutrition and wellness industry. Daniel had driven up the evening before. Maddie sat in the passenger seat with Pepper on her lap, and a book open on top of Pepper that she was not reading, because she was watching the highway lights instead. They stayed in a hotel that had a breakfast buffet she was extremely interested in, and a swimming pool she was slightly less interested in once she saw the depth markers. Daniel had pressed his shirt with the room's iron, which took longer than expected, because the iron had a steam setting he could not locate, and the shirt had been in a bag for 6 hours. He wore the pressed shirt to the signing. Maddie wore the blue dress with the white collar that she had chosen herself, and that had a small ink mark on the left cuff she had tried to remove with a damp cloth the previous night, successfully enough that it no longer looked like ink and now looked like water, which she had decided was acceptable. They were seated at the long conference table when the Luminary Life team arrived, Claire Sutton among them, who nodded at Daniel and then crouched briefly to Maddie's eye level and said it was good to see her again. Maddie said it was good to see her too, and introduced Pepper, which was the same introduction she had given at the farm, and Claire Sutton received it with the same seriousness she had given it the first time. The legal proceedings took 40 minutes. Daniel read everything. He did not perform the reading. He was not making a point. He simply read everything because it was the kind of thing he read carefully. The attorneys on both sides had prepared for a longer negotiation. The negotiation did not materialize because Daniel's questions were specific, technical, and answered the moment they were asked, which left nothing to negotiate around. Then the lead attorney for Luminary Life placed the final page in front of Daniel and indicated the signature line. The contract was for a decade-long exclusive supply arrangement, structured around a minimum intake volume and a per-liter premium, indexed to the proprietary matrix composition match, with a penalty clause for composition deviation that Daniel had requested, and the company's attorneys had accepted without counter because the request itself demonstrated that deviation was not something they needed to worry about. The total contracted value, at minimum volume, was $60 million. Daniel signed. He signed with the same unhurried hand he used to write ledger notations, not slowly for effect, but carefully, because carefulness was how he did things. The notary witnessed it. The photographer from the trade publication took a photograph. Maddie was sitting beside him, and in the photograph her chin was resting on her hands, and she was watching her father's face, with the expression of a child who cannot read the number on the page but can read everything else in the room. The trade publication would run the story the following week, under a headline that included the contract value and Daniel's name and the name of the farm. A journalist from a larger outlet picked it up 2 days after that. By the end of the month, a version of the story had appeared in 4 countries, which Daniel learned about because Claire Sutton sent him the links, and he read 2 of them and found them largely accurate and somewhat longer than necessary. Raymond Holt, who had spoken at the farm supply auction in March about theorists and real land, read the story on his phone at a diner in the county town and set the phone face down on the table and finished his coffee without speaking. The Fairs County Gazette ran a photograph of the farm on its front page. The pasture, the barn, the fence line with its new posts, and below the photograph, Daniel's name appeared in the caption in the same size type as everything else. His name, the farm's name, the number. In print, on a page, permanent. Elliot Marsh appeared in the conference building's lobby as Daniel and Maddie were leaving. He was not there for the signing. He had not been invited, and his presence suggested he had known the time and location from a source Daniel did not investigate. He stood near the elevator bank in his dark jacket, and he looked like a man who had rehearsed what he intended to say, and was now uncertain whether to say it. Daniel walked toward the exit. Maddie was beside him, Pepper under one arm, her other hand in his. Marsh stepped forward. "Mr. Voss," he said. Daniel stopped. Marsh looked at him with the expression of a man who has located the specific place where his confidence used to be and found it significantly reduced. "I misjudged the situation," he said, "at the fair, and after." He paused. "I misjudged you." He extended his hand. Daniel looked at it. Then he shook it, once, brief, without warmth or coldness. The handshake of a man completing something he had not started and was now finished with. He did not speak. He did not need to. Maddie looked up at Marsh with her uncomplicated directness. Then she looked at her father. Whatever she saw in his face satisfied her, because she looked back at the elevator bank and pressed the down button. The doors opened. They stepped in. Daniel looked straight ahead as the doors closed. The lobby disappeared. He was home before the light was gone. That was the thing he noticed first, that he had made the drive back in the long afternoon and arrived while the pasture was still gold, and the barn cast a shadow that hadn't reached the fence line yet. He could not remember the last time he had come home before the dark. He sat in the truck for a moment after he turned the engine off, the farm in front of him exactly as it had always been, the fence line and the hay barn and the porch light that had not yet switched on, because the timer didn't know yet that today was different. Maddie was asleep in the passenger seat. She had fallen asleep somewhere around the 2nd hour of the drive. Pepper tucked under her chin, her head tipped against the window at an angle that would have been uncomfortable for anyone with a grown neck. He got out of the truck and went around and lifted her. She was heavier than she used to be, and would soon be too heavy for this, a fact he was aware of and not ready to examine, and carried her inside and set her on the couch with a blanket from the arm, and her boots still on, because he was not ready to wake her. He made dinner. He made the soup she liked, the one with the small pasta shapes she sorted by type before eating, which made the meal take twice as long, and which he had never once commented on. He set the table. He put Pepper on the chair beside hers. He went to the barn once while the soup was on the stove. He checked the overnight forage levels, made one notation in the ledger, and then he opened the green metal feed bin and took out Elena's leather-bound breeding record. He held it for a moment, the looping border around the cover page, the ink that had run out halfway through and kept going anyway, lighter and lighter, committed to finishing. He put it back, closed the bin, and returned to the kitchen. Maddie woke to the smell of the soup. She came to the table still carrying Pepper, and still wearing the blue dress with the ink mark on the cuff that looked like water. She sat down and sorted 4 pasta shapes into separate sections of the bowl before eating any of them, and Daniel watched this and said nothing. After dinner, she climbed into his lap in the armchair. the way she had when she was smaller, less neatly than she used to, all elbows, and looked at the barn through the window, where the lamp he had left on glowed faintly orange against the evening. "Dad," she said. She held Pepper up and looked at the restitched ear. "Did you know Pepper was already famous?" He looked at her. He looked at the stuffed goat with its patient, lopsided face. Then he looked at the green metal bin visible through the barn window, keeping what it kept, holding what it held. He reached over and turned off the lamp. Some things become extraordinary not because they change, but because someone finally does the counting.